We often picture a villain in a certain way. Movies give us a clear image. A booming voice, dramatic gestures, charisma, a dark office, a world map on the wall. This character gives monologues, stares into the camera, and shows he is the source of evil. Yet the good guys still win, usually with just a minor wound. Real history shows us true monsters. The first name that comes to mind is likely Hitler, with those familiar scenes of him whipping up a crowd, saluting, or yelling over a map in a bunker. Here too, the good guys win, though the wounds from that victory were far from minor. The point is, we usually think we can easily tell good from evil where the line is drawn. We believe we would never mistake one for the other. But I can assure you, the monster might be your friendly elderly neighbor, your child's brilliant teacher, or a polite stranger on the street. Thankfully, the forces of good are always watching, setting the right priorities to protect us. Today we explore how ordinary people become mass murderers. We will trace their paths, examine their lives, and most importantly, discover who finally stops them and how. This is the beginning of a unique encyclopedia on the subject of eliminations. In every neighborhood there is that one child, quiet, focused, always with a tool in hand. While others play ball and argue, he sits with an old radio, patiently taking it apart and putting it back together. Yahya Ayash was exactly that child. Perhaps he would have become a fine technician, running a small repair shop and taking walks with his grandchildren. But his life was shaped by a different set of circumstances, ones he could not escape. Refugee camps, underground movements, armed struggle. Instead of diplomas, his portrait would one day adorn posters as a martyr, and he would earn the ultimate prize he seemed to seek, a sentence of targeted elimination. Let us start from the beginning. Yahya was born on March 6, 1966, in the village of Rafat. This was a typical Palestinian village in the West Bank before the 1967 war changed everything. There were no paved highways or major infrastructure projects. The main road was little more than a dusty track used by people walking, riding donkeys, and the occasional truck. At night it was mostly dark, lit only by a few sporadic lamps and the windows of low stone houses. The buildings were packed close together. Small courtyards held chickens, tools, or sheep. Inside, amenities were basic. Water was delivered on a schedule. Electricity was unreliable. The radio was the main source of news from the outside world. Newspapers arrived irregularly. Television was a luxury. Village life revolved around family, religion, and the land. Men worked in agriculture or sought work in nearby towns. Women managed the home and raised children. Prospects for boys were limited. They could either continue farming or, if fortunate, receive a religious or technical education. In this environment, a child showing an aptitude for learning, a good memory, or an interest in technology stood out as a potential way to escape the village routine. Yahya was such a child, excelling in two key areas at once. For a modest family, this was an opportunity. The boy began studying the Quran early. He displayed an exceptional memory, able to recite a page after seeing it just once. Teachers at the local Islamic foundation took notice. The child was rewarded and praised. His parents had much to be proud of. Their son showed real promise. Alongside his religious studies, Yahya developed technical skills. Anything that hummed, buzzed, or glowed eventually ended up on his workbench. Old radios, televisions, tape recorders. At first, people brought them hoping he could fix them. Sometimes he succeeded, sometimes he took them apart completely. But the process of creation and deconstruction fascinated him. In a more peaceful region, One could imagine him 20 years later as an engineer in a city like Rome, surrounded by schematics and equipment, dealing with the usual complaints about suppliers. But his world was different. Among those who brought him radios and watched his progress, more and more spoke of a struggle for liberation. They began to see his technical skills not as the start of a career, but as a resource for building a terrorist infrastructure. Yahya grew and developed. In 1985, he enrolled at Birzeit University. This was not just a place of higher learning, but a key center of Palestinian intellectual and political life. It was a space where different ideologies clashed. He majored in electrical engineering, studying circuit theory, design, and electronics. The standard path for a gifted student would lead to graduation and an engineering job. Meanwhile, his social circle increasingly included members of the Muslim Brotherhood and the emerging group known as Hamas. Yahya was not a rally leader or an orator. By nature, he was calm, disciplined, and reserved. But those recruiting talents saw in him a powerful combination: deep religiosity, strong organization, a technical mind, and a good education. By 1991, he earned his bachelor's degree in electrical engineering. In a normal life, this is when the job search begins. In his case, work found him quickly. He joined the military wing of Hamas, the Izz ad-Din al-Qassam Brigades. His rise was rapid, and by 1992, he was in charge of this wing. His mission was to disrupt peace talks with Israel at any cost, specifically to prevent the implementation of the Oslo Accords. And by any cost, Yahya meant exactly that. He was a pioneer in advocating for the use of suicide bombers. Given his skills and education, he was the one who equipped them with lethal devices. He chose TATP, acetone triperoxide, as his primary explosive. Its chemical formula is known, but we need not dwell on it. This mixture is notoriously unstable, sensitive to heat, impact, and friction. This is not a predictable block of TNT from a factory. It is a dangerous and unpredictable material normally handled in labs with full protective gear and strict protocols. Ayash prepared these compounds in ordinary apartments and kitchens, training young militants to work with them. The risk was immense. A simple spark could cause an explosion. It was a terribly dangerous substance, but it was accessible to the underground, and that was the main point. His first major operation ended in failure. In the fall of 1992, a car carrying 12 kilograms of homemade explosives headed toward a target. The plan was to drive to the location and carry out a major attack. The car was intercepted. After a chase and a search of the trunk, it was clear this was no ordinary vehicle. 3 passengers were detained. During interrogations, the name Ayash emerged for the first time. But by then, the practical bomb maker had already gone deep underground, changing apartments, contacts, and phone numbers, effectively disappearing. In reality, he was preparing for his next move. In December 1992, Israel deported 415 Hamas activists to southern Lebanon. The official goal was punishment. An unintended consequence was also achieved. The expelled individuals found themselves in an environment with access to Hezbollah expertise, Iranian instructors, and more organized models of underground work. There, they were taught to assemble more professional devices, work with suicide bombers, build infrastructure, and evade intelligence. Under international pressure, some of these individuals later returned to Israel. They were no longer street activists but professional terrorists. Ayash, thanks to his innate talent, absorbed this knowledge and returned as one of the most qualified experts in explosives and bomb making. In April 1993, The first suicide bombing attributed to this new school of thought struck Israel. A car loaded with homemade explosives and gas cylinders exploded near a junction next to two buses. The terrorist and his brother were killed. Several people were wounded. Statistically, it was not a major attack, but within Hamas, it was a successful test, confirming that the new tactics worked. What followed was like a montage in a movie showing a career ascent. Diligence, knowledge, and creativity all worked in his favor. He was not a self-made man, if one ignores the bloody trail and piles of corpses left behind. He did not just make devices, he built a system. A network of safe houses, assembly points, routes, and trained personnel. He assembled the explosive belts himself, installed charges in cars himself, and instructed the bombers on where to go and how to behave. Simultaneously, he trained students, passing on his knowledge so the technology would not die with him. A true guru of death. A cult formed around him in the Palestinian community. The engineer became a symbol. Stories were told about him. His face appeared on posters. For Israel, he became a top priority target. News reports regularly speculated on his whereabouts. Where was he? Was he alive? Was he still active? As long as he was free, the risk of further attacks remained. A life constantly hunted by security services is not normal. It involved moving from place to place, living in temporary housing, changing phones and associates. This likely took a toll on his psyche. At some point, Hamas formed an entire department dedicated solely to Yahya's logistics. They transported him, hid him, provided for his needs, and created working conditions, even setting up chemical labs in his apartments. While he operated underground in the West Bank, this defensive posture was at its peak. The situation changed when Yasser Arafat arrived in Gaza in 1994 under the Oslo Accords. A Palestinian Authority was established there, with its own security forces and new symbols of the peace process. Leaders of Hamas and other groups were given protection by the Palestinian police. Formally, these were government officials, but in reality, they were armed men tasked with protecting individuals Israel wanted to see behind bars. For Ayash, this meant a new level of security. He moved to Gaza under this double layer of protection. Organizations and the new administration were reluctant to cooperate with Israel on detaining figures like him. For a man who had lived like a mole for years, this was the first period of relative relaxation. It was like being allowed to walk in the yard after solitary confinement. He still maintained his cover, but the constant sense of imminent threat faded. It is often during such periods of relaxation that hunters find their opening. By the mid-1990s, Israel had grown weary of the attacks linked to his name. Public pressure mounted. The political leadership was focused on removing the engineer from the terrorist equation. Options like airstrikes, raids, or arrests were discussed, but Gaza's urban density and political restrictions made forceful options extremely risky. Any mistake could cause dozens of casualties and international backlash. The chosen solution was a product of its time, a blend of human intelligence and targeted technology. The goal was to eliminate him alone, without a large-scale operation. To reach the monster, they needed a weak link in his inner circle. Among the chain of people connected to the house where he was hiding, they found a suitable intermediary. Kamel Hamid, a construction contractor, a respected man, and the uncle of the landlord, Osama. The details of his recruitment are unknown, likely involving financial incentives and promises of a new life abroad. He eventually agreed. Through him, an object entered the house that would become the operation's turning point, a mobile phone. Not a cheap model, but a modern flip phone. In the mid-1990s, such a device in Gaza was a status symbol. This particular phone weighed slightly more than usual, about 350 grams. Hidden within it were roughly 15 grams of high-grade RDX-based explosive with a compact detonator. Not TATP. The phone was fully functional. It could make and receive calls. Camel likely believed it contained a listening device. The idea that it was designed to kill its user may not have occurred to him. Since cell phones were still a luxury, Osama gratefully accepted the gift from his kind Uncle Camel. Thus, the phone moved closer to its target. Ayash was a creature of habit. His father called him every morning to check on him. On that day, the landline in the apartment where the engineer was staying was not working. A fortunate coincidence. But the father also knew the mobile number of Osama, his son's childhood friend and current host. Hearing a familiar voice, Osama handed his friend the new phone. Ayash took the phone. As Osama left the room to give them privacy, he glimpsed his friend holding the phone to his ear. Israeli intelligence, monitoring this circle of contacts, was listening on the line. Ayash's voice was instantly recognizable, a previously recorded and studied timbre, speech rhythm, and distinctive features. When all doubt vanished, the command for remote detonation was given. According to one account, it was sent through the operator's network. Another says via an external transmitter. As Yahya spoke to his father, the charge inside the phone casing detonated. The explosion in the room was a brief pop, a flash, shrapnel, blood, and the acrid smell of burnt chemicals. Explosives are indiscriminate, even against someone who reportedly boasted they could kill him any way but this. Yahya had once claimed he could literally smell explosives. His elimination sent shockwaves through Gaza. His funeral became a mass event. Yasser Arafat called him a holy martyr. The city was plastered with posters. The mood at Hamas headquarters was different. Those who considered the engineer nearly untouchable saw that even with double protection and his key status, he was still a reachable target for those dedicated to intelligence and assassination. In Israel, they understood that killing one man does not solve terrorism, but it does remove an irreplaceable specialist and mentor. Ayash's story belongs to an era when the primary threat came from individuals turning everyday objects and common chemicals into weapons. The countermeasure was a blend of espionage and a targeted, intelligent assassination using a communication device, a symbol of that era. But alongside the engineer, there were other figures, not technicians, but strategists, people who spent years building terror infrastructure, managing not just a single suicide cell but entire organizations. For them, a booby-trapped phone was insufficient. The next example, Abu Jihad, demonstrates how intelligence services skillfully utilized a different format. Complex, multi-stage operations involving the Navy, special forces, and meticulous planning. If Ayash represents the clandestine engineer working with chemicals and wires, Abu Jihad was a figure of a different caliber. He was not a man assembling bombs in a kitchen. He was a man who, for years, decided who would carry those bombs, where they would go, and what the consequences would be. He was not a religious fanatic. He was characterized by a cold, systemic approach, viewing violence as a tool for political pressure. Therefore, his elimination required not just a phone, but a naval task force and a carefully planned ground operation. After Israel's War of Independence, Arab residents found themselves in various situations. Some stayed and accepted their new status. Others left, hoping to return by force. Still others were expelled for supporting militants. The al-Wazir family fell into the last category. The father was a baker, but as the saying goes, man does not live by bread alone. The family's social involvement extended beyond baking. They hid and assisted militants. Eventually, the new government made it clear such activities were incompatible with life in the state. The family was relocated to the al-Batsh refugee camp in Gaza. A refugee camp is a place considered temporary, yet people often live there for decades. Children grow up there feeling their lives are the result of a historical injustice that must be corrected by force. Khalil, the future Abu Jihad, grew up in such a family. He had the chance to study first at UN schools, then at Alexandria University in Egypt. There, he not only studied academic subjects but also received military training, gradually shifting from a civilian path to armed struggle. He joined the Muslim Brotherhood, embracing its ethos. He spent time in prison, where instead of just serving his sentence, he studied Hebrew, read Zionist thinkers, and analyzed the enemy's mindset. Even at this stage, he was interested not in being a foot soldier, but in understanding the structure of the conflict. After another arrest, he was deported first to Saudi Arabia, where he worked as a teacher. Among the local Palestinian diaspora, his lessons turned into political discussions. Then he moved to Kuwait, a hub for the Palestinian community at the time. There, among the diaspora, he met Yasser Arafat, the future leader of the Palestinian national movement. During this period, he became part of the inner circle, founding the Fatah movement, an underground organization dedicated to armed struggle against Israel. These same individuals would later establish the key political and military structures, leading to the formation of the Palestine Liberation Organization in 1964. The PLO, later recognized as the main representative body of the Palestinians, served as a training ground in various countries. Algeria for independent struggle experience, China for the doctrine of people's war, North Vietnam and North Korea for strategies of asymmetric confrontation. Abu Jihad accumulated experience, interacted with various partners, and studied guerrilla warfare and terrorist tactics. Within Fatah and the PLO, he became the figure responsible for directing the armed struggle. He analyzed which targets would have the greatest political impact and how attacks affected the domestic situation in Israel and the Arab world. He viewed terrorism not as chaotic violence, but as a means of systemic pressure. The goal was to create a persistent sense of threat, forcing every Israeli citizen to consider the possibility of an attack in daily life. Making such decisions required a comprehensive approach, information, analysis, and an understanding of societal and elite reactions. This made him strong, and this made him dangerous. For a long time, an unspoken rule existed in Israeli intelligence and political circles. Avoid eliminating leaders of this level to prevent uncontrolled escalation and their replacement by even more radical figures. Abu Jihad had been under surveillance for years, but no direct attempts were made on his life. Everything changed on March 7, 1988. That morning, a service bus embarked on its usual route in southern Israel. It carried employees of the Nuclear Research Center near Dimona, mostly women, along a deserted road in the Negev desert. It was a routine trip, the same bus. Everyone knew each other. A normal workday lay ahead. On the highway, the bus was stopped by armed men linked to the Palestine Liberation Organization. The passengers were taken hostage. There were 11 people in total, 10 women and 1 man. The terrorists threatened them with guns and explosives. The bus interior became a giant time bomb. The siege dragged on for endless hours of terrified waiting. The hostages lived under constant threat. Any sudden move could mean death. The terrorists executed 2 people. Israeli security forces arrived. Negotiations failed. The decision was made to storm the bus. The Yamam counterterrorism unit carried out the rescue operation. Under the circumstances, the assault was extremely difficult and dangerous. In the end, 1 hostage was killed, several were wounded, and all the terrorists were eliminated. This particular route departed later than others, specifically for working mothers who had been busy with their children in the morning. The only male employee on board was a man named Victor Ram, whose wife had died from a fatal illness about 6 months earlier, leaving him to care for 3 children. In Israeli memory, this event remains not as an episode of high politics, but as a tragic reminder of how vulnerable everyday life is to terrorism. It showed how one ordinary morning can forever alter the lives of people simply on their way to work. It was after this attack that the Israeli leadership concluded that operations directed by Abu Jihad must never happen again. Eliminating him became a military necessity. What was known at this point? Years of intelligence had built a dossier. Israeli intelligence knew his residence in Tunisia. They knew the layout of his villa, his family, his security detail, his exact daily routine, his routes, and his network of contacts. Some information came from agents in his circle, some from technical means. It is known that Israel twice thwarted attempts by other groups to assassinate him. Like spiders in a jar, to maintain the ability to carry out the operation themselves under controlled conditions. An exact replica of Abu Jihad's villa was constructed in Israel. The layout, staircase, door placements, even the furnishings were duplicated. This allowed special forces to rehearse their actions. They ran through scenarios dozens of times, approaching the house, breaching the door, neutralizing guards, moving toward the bedroom. This reflected the approach of the era, a combination of precise intelligence, physical simulation, and rigorous training. It was the night of April 13, 1988. A naval task force, several vessels and a submarine, an entire flotilla, left Haifa. One ship carried a medical unit with an operating team of reserve doctors who had participated in rehearsals. Another housed the operations headquarters. A third had a landing pad for helicopters, to be used only in an emergency. They plotted a course to bring them close to the Tunisian coast, but outside standard detection zones. After approaching the coast, divers entered the water. Their task was to check the shoreline, assess for potential witnesses, and prepare a landing point for the main group. Once they confirmed readiness, naval commandos and intelligence officers approached the shore in rubber boats. Prearranged vehicles, minivans rented days earlier, and a passenger car posing as a tourist vehicle awaited them on shore. The group divided into teams. One was responsible for the perimeter, the entrance, the basement, and the bedroom. The villa was in a respectable area of the capital, surrounded by a stone wall. It appeared to be a quiet, protected place. A bodyguard slept in a car near the house. A commando in disguise approached him. For some reason, the disguise was that of a woman holding a headscarf and a box of chocolates. It was an odd choice, but perhaps its absurdity made the figure seem non-threatening. The bodyguard woke up, looked up. A pistol with a silencer emerged from under the box, one shot, and the guard post at the gate was neutralized. A dog in the yard reacted to the noise and movement. Barking was a risk. It was quickly dealt with, a decision made not from emotion but to prevent alarm. Ahead of schedule, the villa's front door was reinforced, but for a team trained to breach it, it was a matter of technique and a few seconds. Some fighters immediately moved to the basement, where, According to intelligence, an armed guard was posted. He too had no time to react. In another room, they found an armed gardener, essentially another security element. He was also neutralized. According to observations, shortly before the operation, lights in the study and bedroom had gone out. The owner had finished work and gone to sleep. The soldiers climbed the stairs, which they knew by heart from training. The bedroom door opened. Inside was a man who had coordinated armed conflict for years, issuing orders that led to deaths on both sides. They did not spare ammunition. Abu Jihad's body was later found with approximately 70 bullet wounds. This was not an act of cruelty, but insurance. The operatives did not plan to give him any chance of survival. His wife and children in the house were left unharmed. No physical force was used against them. This was a fundamental limit. The target was the terrorist mastermind, not his family. From the first action at the car to the last fighter leaving the villa, about 5 minutes elapsed. The return followed the same pattern: cars, shore, boats, ships. By morning, the vessels were on their way back, and no surgery was needed in the medical unit. There were no casualties among the operatives. The next day, news services scrambled to report. One of the key leaders of the Palestinian movement had been eliminated in Tunis. Tunisian authorities were shocked. A complex operation had been carried out on their territory in the capital and had vanished without a trace. A global controversy erupted. Was such an action permissible? What would the consequences be? For those involved in the planning, the operation's meaning was clear. This was the elimination of a man who had spent years organizing attacks against civilians and military targets and who had crossed a certain line. Essentially, this operation showcased the maximum concentration of intelligence capabilities in the late 1980s. Agents, simulations, a naval group, special forces. Comparing the stories of Ayash and Abu Jihad reveals how the nature of threats and countermeasures evolved. Ayash was a clandestine engineer working at the level of individual devices. Abu Jihad was a strategist managing a network of operations. Against the former, a targeted technological solution in the realm of communications was used. Against the latter, a comprehensive naval and special forces operation was deployed. But by the start of the 21st century, the threat landscape shifted again. Individuals whose expertise lay not in homemade bombs or organizing raids, but in high technology, energy, electronics, and unmanned systems came to the fore. To tell Fadi al-Batsh's story, we must change the setting. This is not a deserted Mediterranean coastline. We are going to Kuala Lumpur, an Asian metropolis with skyscrapers, university campuses, and renewable energy conferences. In this environment lived a Palestinian engineer who left for morning prayers one day and never returned home. Fadi Mohammed al-Batsh was born in 1983 in Gaza. He grew up in Jabalia, a town often featured in news reports of shelling and military clashes. His childhood, like many in the area, was marked by risk, proximity to combat, infrastructure problems, and instability. From an early age, he showed an affinity for technology. He was fascinated by how electrical equipment worked and the stability of power grids. He was preoccupied with issues like ensuring stable electricity supply under unstable conditions. He earned a degree in electrical engineering and found work in Gaza's energy sector, within the regional administration. In a place where power outages were a daily occurrence, power system engineers were crucial specialists. At one point, he got the opportunity to study in Malaysia. For many Palestinians, this was a chance for a different life. University, laboratories, scholarships, uninterrupted electricity. In 2011, he enrolled at the University of Malaya. By 2015, he had defended his dissertation in electrical engineering and had published around 18 scientific articles. His work focused on power quality, converters, and the stability of power supply systems. A separate line of his research concerned the energy supply and operational efficiency of unmanned aerial vehicles, specifically extending their flight time by optimizing power systems. To the uninitiated, this sounds like a highly specialized academic field. But in military reality, the power system is a major limitation for drones used by non-state armed groups. More stable power and efficient load management mean longer flight times, greater range, more data transmission, or the ability to deliver payloads further. In the Gaza Strip, such improvements had practical, not just theoretical, significance. Even a modest increase in autonomy could transform a primitive aircraft into a reconnaissance or weapon delivery tool. This is why research into power sources, converters, and electrical system stability attracts intense scrutiny from intelligence agencies. Beyond his academic work, Fadi led prayers, served as an imam, and was involved with Islamic charitable organizations linked to the Palestinian diaspora. He taught on the campus of the University of Kuala Lumpur, lecturing on electrical engineering and mentoring students. In 2016, he received an award from the Malaysian authorities for academic achievement. To colleagues and students, he was a model teacher and researcher, calm, polite, and always willing to help, lest one think he was merely a successful scientist who fell victim to violence. It is worth jumping ahead. After his killing, the military wing of Hamas issued an official statement recognizing Fadi al-Batsh as one of their own and stated he held a position related to the development of rocket and drone programs. This statement is significant not for its details, which are scant, but for the acknowledgement itself. Typically, such roles, especially technical ones, are not publicly announced. In this case, the organization deemed it necessary to confirm his affiliation after his death. Israeli sources claim he participated in projects to improve missile accuracy and modernize drone control systems. Some publications mention his possible contacts related to acquiring technology and components through third countries. Thus, his biography existed in at least two parallel realities. The first was public, a scientist, teacher, imam, and active community member. The second was hidden, an engineer involved in Hamas military projects. For one country, he was a success story of a Gazan with a foreign education. For another, he was a specialist capable of turning theoretical research into practice, impacting security, or rather, the lack of it. Malaysia is a country that traditionally shows solidarity with the Palestinians. Support organizations operate there, and events are held for the Palestinian community. For Palestinian students and professionals, it is a relatively safe environment, far from the immediate conflict zone. This also makes such places convenient for those wishing to combine academic work with activities on behalf of armed movements. But it also makes these countries vulnerable to third-party operations. For Israeli foreign intelligence, such geography meant operating under foreign jurisdiction, covertly and with minimal footprint. This was not the first time. So, April 21, 2018, early morning in the Gombak neighborhood of Kuala Lumpur, a residential area with apartment buildings, parking lots, and a mosque nearby. M on his usual route to Fajr, the pre-dawn prayer. The street was still relatively quiet. According to Malaysian police and media reports, two men on a motorcycle arrived in the area early. Surveillance cameras recorded their movements. They drove down the street several times, stopped, and changed positions. Only later would it become clear they were waiting for someone. As Fadi exited his building, the motorcycle began moving toward him. The passenger on the back held a weapon. On a stretch of road with few people or cars, the motorcycle closed in. The passenger fired a series of shots. It is estimated at least 14 bullets were fired. Several found their target. Fadi fell to the asphalt. The motorcycle sped away before bystanders could react. Medical services arrived quickly but declared him dead. Such a scene was unusual for Malaysia. It is not a country where morning shootings in residential areas are common. Police launched a manhunt and released composite sketches of 2 suspects. Both were athletic men. Physical descriptions varied, from European to Middle Eastern in appearance. Their routes were tracked, cameras checked, and their border-crossing histories analyzed. It was reported the suspects entered the country on forged documents, possibly months before the attack, and left Malaysia shortly afterward via a route through third countries. Fadi's family and Hamas representatives directly blamed Mossad. Malaysian officials were cautious about possible foreign intelligence involvement. Israel, as in most similar cases, neither officially confirmed nor denied involvement. Officials hinted in comments that the incident could have resulted from internal disputes or consequences of activities linked to armed struggle. Yet, in the Israeli press and expert circles, the theory of foreign intelligence agents is considered most likely. If we return to where we began, to the image of the villain, it becomes clear how deceptive that image is. Real evil almost never looks like it does in movies. It does not scream, wave its arms, or stand by a world map. More often, it speaks softly, gives lectures, repairs electronics, analyzes circuits, writes articles, and discusses the future. And that is precisely what makes it so hard to recognize. The stories of Yahya Ayash, Abu Jihad, and Fadi al-Batsh are not 3 identical plots, but 3 stages in the evolution of violence. Ayash was the man who turned everyday objects and common chemicals into instruments of mass murder. He worked with his hands, wires, fuses, explosives. Abu Jihad was the strategist who rarely touched weapons but made decisions determining where and when those weapons would be used. He managed fear as a system. Fadi al-Batsh represents the next generation, an engineer of a different sort, a man capable of influencing war from beyond the battlefield, in university classrooms and laboratories. None were cartoonish villains. Each had a biography, a family, a social circle, and social roles that in themselves aroused no suspicion. This is what makes such figures especially dangerous. The line between civilian life and participation in violence is completely erased. For Israeli intelligence, these stories are not about revenge or spectacular operations. They are about choosing between bad and worse, about attempting to stop a chain of murders, understanding that eliminating one person does not destroy an ideology or end a conflict, but it can slow the flywheel of terror. Something else is crucial. The eliminations discussed are always a last resort. They do not arise from nothing. They are preceded by years of surveillance, analysis, internal debate, doubt, and consideration of consequences. This is not a cinematic shot set to music. It is a decision that weighs lives lost against lives that might be saved. And this brings us to the central point. The world is rarely black and white, but it always involves responsibility and irresponsibility. People who transform knowledge, power, or organizational talent into instruments of systemic violence make conscious, repeated choices backed by action. It is this choice, not their origin, education, or social role, that makes them a target. The history of Israeli intelligence is not a story of all-powerful heroes. It is the story of people who make mistakes, learn, adapt, and live with the consequences of their decisions. Sometimes these decisions seem cruel, sometimes necessary, almost never easy. If you found this exploration of a shadowy world compelling, please show your support by liking this video. Subscribing to the channel helps bring more of these detailed stories to light, and sharing this content with others who might be interested keeps the conversation going. Thank you for watching. NS seem cruel, sometimes necessary, almost never easy. If you found this exploration of a shadowy world compelling, please show your support by liking this video. Subscribing to the channel helps bring more of these detailed stories to light, and sharing this content with others who might be interested keeps the conversation going. Thank you for watching.